Good evening, everyone. My name is Ware Harmon. I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle, and I don't even have the words to describe how nice it is to see you all in the audience with us tonight. On behalf of our staff and our friends at Mountaineers Books, it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's conversation with Bellamy, Pailthorp, and Seth Kantner. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for coming with us tonight to our forum space or for tuning in online. Town Hall's current COVID-19 building policies are dedicated to the safety of our speakers, performers, staff, and audience. And so we thank all of you who have joined us tonight here in the building for masking, for providing proof of vaccination, and for complying with other policies designed to keep us all safe. That's a subtle encouragement to those of you watching from home to come on down. We're trying to make everything as safe as possible for you here. Tonight's program will run around 60 minutes, including Q&A. To integrate our in-person and virtual audience experiences, we're using a modified Q&A platform this year. To submit your question here or at home, please enter meet.ps/Kantner or scan the QR code right now on screen if you're watching at home using your smartphone. We'll drop the link in the chat and remind you later once we get to Q&A. And by the way, if you're wondering in the room why you can't just blurt out your question, it's because you won't be amplified and the folks at home won't hear your question. And we just don't want to send you all to microphones right now together. So at any rate, that's the whole integration point of this. We can't guarantee we'll be able to address every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. And those who would like to view the program using closed captions, please click the CC button in the bottom right-hand corner of the video player. Not you, but them. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming events include Bill Schutt's Natural History of the Heart, Bartow Elmore discussing Monsanto and its implications, or I should say plans, for the future of our food supply, Paige Harden on the implications of our DNA for social equality, as well as appearances by Susan Orlean, Neil Stevenson, and many, many more. Visit our website to join our email list and get the latest updates as more programs are added throughout the season. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arno G. Matulski Science Lecture Series is supported by Microsoft and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you know by now, Town Hall is at heart a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members here in the audience with us tonight and watching online. If you share Town Hall's vision of a community energized and empowered by inquiries into politics, science, and culture, please consider supporting us by becoming a member yourself. You'll find more information about that online. Last, you will definitely want to dive deeper into this evening's topic by purchasing a copy of Seth's book. If you're here in the room tonight or online, we urge you to visit the Mountaineers Books website, where that's the easiest way to pick up your copy of the book, and you will have prompt fulfillment and get the book into your hands, and that's the best way to support the author directly as well. And with that, Seth Kantner was born and raised in northern Alaska and has worked as a trapper, a wilderness guide, wildlife photographer, gardening teacher, and adjunct professor. His writings appeared in the New York Times, Outside, Orion, and Smithsonian. Kantner is the author of the award-winning novel Ordinary Wolves, the memoir Shopping for Porcupine, and collection of essays Swallowed by the Great Land and Other Dispatches from Alaska's Frontier. After a 10-year stint in Berlin, Bellamy Pailthorp has been a mainstay at Seattle-Tacoma's KNKX radio since 1999. Bellamy owns the Environment Beat and has a deep interest in indigenous affairs and the Salish Sea. Seth Kantner's new book, 1,000 Trails Home, Living with Caribou, is the subject of their discussion tonight. Please join me in welcoming Bellamy Pailthorp and Seth Kantner.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here. There are actually people in the room. I wasn't sure if people would actually come out, and here you are. So it's really wonderful to see your masked faces. I can tell you're smiling even above the masks. And what a strange and interesting format to know that there are also people online listening. I'm not used to this. I normally work in a small dark room as a public radio reporter, but I'm delighted to be here to help celebrate the launch of Seth's new book. It's terrific. My copy is full of Post-it notes and lots of scribbles on the Post-its, but I wouldn't want to deface the book itself. It's beautiful. A little bit of a hot commodity right now, so do get online and order it as soon as you can if you want to read it, and I think you will after tonight. So, as was said, I'm a public radio journalist. I cover the environment beat at KNKX. Climate change is a huge part of the beat right now, so I jumped at the chance to meet Seth through his book and have this conversation. Before we get started with some reading by Seth, I wanted to share a little experience that I had 2 years ago with Alaskan caribou. My husband Michael and I decided we wanted to see the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, UNWR. Well, we could. So in June 2019, we joined a river rafting expedition on the Kongakut out of Fairbanks. This was wonderful for so many reasons, but the highlight was definitely about a week in on July 1st, I checked my camera just to be sure of the date, the porcupine herd crossed in front of our rafts. We were able to stop and just watch them for at least an hour, and the most striking thing was just how many there were. Thousands and thousands of them. They just went on and on and on, like a necklace draped across the landscape, and you couldn't see where it clasped. So they were moving, though, and they seemed in a hurry, migrating, certainly rushing to get away from us, young and old. But their hair was everywhere, especially in the water. It piled up among the rocks and swirled along the riverbanks, and we kept seeing it in several camps. Even when you didn't see the caribou, that hair was always there as a reminder of the porcupine herd. So that's about as much as I know about Alaskan caribou. Maybe a little bit more than your average city or suburb dweller, which I am. So let's get a little bit of a different perspective here from Seth Kantner and hear him read the prologue from his book about the much larger Western Arctic Caribou Herd. It's the largest one, I believe, right, Seth?
I think it's the largest migratory mammal herd in North America for sure, and then one of the largest in the world.
1,000 trails home, living with caribou.
Actually, can I talk you into turning the slides on? Let's see if this device is going to work. I'm not getting a forward on your button there, but if you can press something to move to the next slide, I'll kind of show what Bellamy's talking about. I'm going to start with the prologue in the book. I do want to say that my brother Cole is in the audience here, and so if I mention Cole in the story, that's him. So this is the prologue. It took me 8 years to write this book and probably 30 years to film it. And I'm talking to a certain extent about climate change and keeping track of where your food's coming from and connection to nature. And so it's been pretty interesting to bump up against COVID, and then my book is lost on a container ship and etc. So it's almost like what I'm trying to talk about is I'm a little bit late again to getting the message out. Prologue, Caribou in the Night. Barefoot in the darkness on thin fall snow, I stop walking. My feet will be freezing soon, and I'm only here to listen. 40 steps behind is the small yellow glow of lamplight coming from the window in my sod home. Inside, I have hardwood steaming for runners for a dog sled, and I need to get back in to make sure the water doesn't boil dry. Above the branches and brush, the stars are sharp, and a thin fingernail moon offers little luminescence. From the north comes a cold breeze, hardly more than a stir. The aurora is weak too, faint green smoke up against the stars and not enough to light the night. Ice pans far out in the river make small, soft roars as they collide with heaped fast ice, tinkling and then spinning silently on their way west. My feet are feeling the cold. South, across the dark river, float the comments of a longtime companion, a great horned owl. Hoo, hoo, Ooh, ooh, ooh. From down the ridge comes the rattle of chains and a few whimpers and whines. My dog team pacing in circles, restless in the rich, smelling darkness. They too are likely holding freezing pads up off the snow, one at a time to thaw while they focus their ears north. For once, I'm not out checking on the team. I'm not trying to dissuade a middle-of-the-night grizzly bear from borrowing my meat. I'm only listening. From the north, the night slowly fills with soft sounds, many feet moving through snow and the low, wiry brush of frozen tundra, the click of hoof tendons, an occasional grunt, and the clatter of antlers sweeping dwarf birch and alder branches. Caribou are passing in the night. Big and small herds have come through for nearly 2 months now. It's only the last 3 days since the river began running heavier ice that this uninterrupted line of animals has been marching east. In truth, caribou have been passing my entire life. The land is veined with their ancient trails, but something is different tonight. There's something big and dark and wild about standing barefoot on thin snow and frozen ground, hearing thousands of animals traveling through and not being able to see even one. It's exciting and humbling, shivery and on the edge of scary, as if some huge parallel nation is on the move out under the starlight. Now my feet have frozen patches. I'm suddenly cognizant of the pinch and the burn, and I hurry back towards the small yellow glow, a lone light in this world of darkness. Inside, on my family's old bearskin couch, I sit and feel the twin aches of skin thawing and of love for my home, this land of caribou. That's the prologue. I start with seasons. I divide the book into 4 seasons, and the first season is fall, which might not fit with the calendar that you have at home, but fall was our time of gathering berries and food and moss to insulate the house, and then definitely meat, caribou. So I'm going to read a tiny little section. Chapter 1 takes place in our old sod igloo where I was born. At those early years, we had a tunnel you crawled in, and small place and dirt floor, and if you put your cup of coffee down, potentially it would freeze on the floor, but up high where the adults' heads might be, would be, maybe sweltering, sod igloo style. Our sod igloo was small and low, the way sod homes were constructed for warmth. 12 or 14 feet across the floor and 6 feet tall in the middle at the highest point. Above us, from the peeled poles of the ceiling, hung horizontal rows of cotton string, blackened with dried blood. There my mom hung strips of caribou to dry. The meat darkened until it was ready to turn on the strings. When the strips were dry enough not to spoil, she'd stuff them into cloth flour sacks to store inside our log cache. Then my dad would slice more for her to hang. All winter, meat hung drying. Bags and bags of dried caribou went into the cache. Punaktok for lunches all winter, and for shedding to make pemmican to eat on the trail, and for snacks all summer when there was no cold to keep meat and no caribou nearby to hunt. Tucked in where the small poles of the roof crossed the eave beam were long sheets of sinew, peeled from the backs of bull caribou carcasses. Dried, they curled, stiff and translucent and faintly yellow, ready to strip and use as thread for skin sewing projects. On our bed were caribou hides, soft and warm and giving off extra warmth and comfort in some nameless yet familiar way. Across the tunnel entrance to the outside world were more hides. Around our tiny home were household items made from caribou parts, parkas and mucklucks and mittens, hide hinges, caribou skin weather stripping, antler handles on awls and knives and saws and pot lids. Cushions on the floor and stump seats were made from circles of thick-haired caribou hide sewn together, skin out. In the corner, hanging from a wooden peg, was our thermos. In its huge fur tube, caribou hide sewn skin out into a sleeve as big around as a stovepipe for extra insulation during cold weather travel. The few store-bought items we owned were protected and used with care. Caribou skins were the one material we knew no dearth of. We could hardly imagine a life without all the caribou skins a person might need. Speaking of the hairline, and a hairline around the floor.
That's amazing.
Caribou hides. But that you describing that river with the caribou, you talk about high water, so the hairline, when you're kayaking down one of those rivers, this white line where the caribou had left so much hair.
Yeah, and so your family lived from caribou.
To a certain extent, yeah.
So tell us exactly where we are in this book. The book unfolds very nicely and gradually, so you don't necessarily know all the answers in the beginning when you're hearing the prologue.
If you think of Alaska, it's so big. It's like if you said, have you visited the United States? Yeah, I've been to Florida. Somebody who lives in Washington might say, that's not what I'm talking about. And so Alaska's kind of the same way. I lived in the Arctic, right on the south side of the Brooks Range. My brother Cole and I were raised there on the Kobuk River, 25 or 30 miles from a Eskimo village, Iñupiat Eskimo. In the summer it was 30 miles because river miles. In the winter it was 25 miles because we took portages over the tundra. And this is the kind of country. Sea ice. Winter was the biggest season. It was bigger then than it is nowadays. Longer, I should say. Animals were of utmost important. All animals, for one form or another. Seasons for hunting depended on when the animal was fat and tasted good. So the imported, I'll just say outsider or white version of seasons wasn't the thought process there. It was, when's it useful? This area is right about tree line, so we had a mix of tundra, rivers, mountains, but we also had spruce and cottonwood and birches. A few miles further north, there were no more of that, although that tree line is moving. As a result, on forays to the states, as we call it, but the lower 48, I would hear about igloos, which is, the mindset is sod igloos. Snow igloos. But if you moved where we had those resources, logs and sod, to make a sod igloo, a home. If you moved a certain number of miles north, then that's why snow was used, because there wasn't these resources.
And so your father was a scientist who had worked with caribou, right? Or a young grad student and got a position and left it and struck out on his own and eventually married and had you and your brother Cole in a sod igloo in the middle of nowhere in Alaska.
I'm glad you got it covered. Was that one sentence? My dad grew up in Toledo, my mom in Cleveland, and as a result of my dad going to a Catholic school and being sort of, nature was in his head, but he was combined in a city, he left at age 17 to go to the territory of Alaska to college. That's where he studied science and then ended up studying caribou. Very quickly in the process, he stopped being a scientist because he wanted to live with the caribou. That's the end of my story.
And that's Howie in the book, who is a towering figure. I feel like I know Howie and Mama and Cole, by the way. Sorry, Cole. Just a little bit. Yeah.
I wanted to move, let's stop here as far as slides, Bellamy. I just wanted to show the country mix of, and you can see some timber there and mountains, but not very much further north. It's, pretty open country. And then I'm going to stop with the slides for now.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. So in the beginning, you're about 25 years old, and you and Cole grew up barefoot on the snow? I mean, what the heck?
Well, my prologue is Kate, who's here in the audience, allowed me to sort of flow with the time element. So my prologue, I'm 25 years old, but then chapter 1, I'm, where the igloo I was born in, and Cole was 14 months older than me. And I'm not sure the whole barefoot thing, other than maybe being kids in that environment, we just didn't like shoes. It's pretty horrible to have them on right now, to tell you the truth. But so we stretched that season of summer and then running around on snow as long as we could. And then in the winter, we wore either shoe packs or mucklucks. But if we did scamper around, or if we were out on the tundra and we saw some bare ground with no snow on it, we quickly took our mucklucks off and touched the earth. Who knows why, but we liked it.
So the thing that I love so much about this book is that, you can read about caribou and learn about caribou, but I feel like you and your family, you really know caribou, and you describe how you know them in a much more intimate way than I normally hear, in terms of you're eating them, you're wearing them, you're admiring them, you're watching them. I mean, how do you know caribou? Like, how do you feel about this animal?
I'm walking around Seattle, I'm just always like, look what the caribou are doing, but they're actually people. Well, when I was a kid, if we saw a human, it was pretty big deal. We'd shout travelers, which is what we called them, and then run and tell my parents, travelers are coming. So people were kind of the rarest thing there was, and I feel kind of touchy-feely saying this, but the animals were kind of our companions. So if you went out in the morning and out to check the world, especially when there's snow, you'd just be looking at all the tracks to see what the animals did. And so it's not till 50 years later I realized that those were kind of our friends. Well, we also ate our friends. And so you do the combination of those things, gutting a caribou, skinning a caribou, knowing what season the hair sheds and what season the skins are good for making parkas, on and on and on and on. You end up sort of knowing this creature in so many different ways.
And there's a lot of ritual around it too, like specific meals that happen the moment, like basically you drop everything if you've got one, and then a certain stew is made, and you're looking for the fatty ones, hopefully, and you're looking for the stomach fat and the various things.
Absolutely. So the Eskimo culture is so focused on fat that, first of all, I was always a skinny white boy, which is like the worst thing humanly possible, but everything, it's almost like a science fiction with alien being able to see in infrared or something. Any creature that had fat. And so if you shot a caribou and came home with a skinny caribou, you're just worse than a convict. I don't know how to describe how bad you were. But, and so that the focus on the meals that were fat, and, first is saving the fat.
And yet there's a lot of ethics about, if an animal is partially injured, you got to get it down and be careful with it and not wasteful, right?
That's not widespread anymore. It's kind of a messy mix of the past and the present. But my dad he really loves nature, and so he raised my brother and I in that concept with you couldn't just shoot stuff and say, oh, it ran off wounded, and so we did a lot of, I don't know how to swim, but we did a lot of dog paddling in ice pans to try to get a duck, or a wounded duck, or a goose, or such. And so I have lots of stories about that, especially how pink you get when you crawl out.
Does your skin itch afterwards?
No.
That's what happens with clamming here. Like, you get cold and it itches.
No, I don't remember that, but I can't do it anymore. Last time I tried about it, I had a heart attack. So what do you, this is a book, above all, you've written a lot of books about your experience growing up there, but this is a book about the caribou. So talk a little bit about this species in particular and what you love and admire about them. There's nothing quite like the size of the herd. It got almost to 500,000 maybe 15 years ago. So, and then where Cole and I were raised is kind of the land funnels caribou through there, and it's hard to describe what it's like to have such a huge number of animals flowing through your yard. It's I don't. If you thought about some Serengeti type of nature show, and it's in the morning you go out and it's going through your yard, it's kind of indescribable. And then obviously once that herd is gone, then there's a huge loneliness on the land. Tied to that herd is all sorts of ravens and migratory wolves, and the land is almost loud with the life of everything living off of the caribou. And so I feel really tied to salmon and bears and wolves and beaver and otter and every type of animal up there. But the caribou, there's something bigger about that sudden presence of so much life. And then as far as food and then furs, it's just incredibly important for the historical Iñupiat society because of the insulative value of the caribou hair, that those hollow hairs on the caribou are so much warmer than everything else.
Didn't you tell me you took it backpacking?
Oh yeah, actually when I
you
tried to go up the north face of Denali, snowshoeing in from Kantishna, it's the 100th anniversary of Belmore Brown climbing it. And so I took a caribou hide because I just couldn't stand the idea of camping on a mountain without a calf skin. It's lighter and thinner, but so sleeping on a caribou hide.
You don't like a thermarest?
A thermarest is a cold item. It's nylon and it's cold. Caribou hide you put on top of the thermarest and life is good. That's the end of that.
But they're pretty uniquely adapted in certain ways. I didn't realize they have some sort of infrared vision.
It's ultraviolet, and I didn't know a certain amount of this. It's embarrassing how growing up on the land you can end up having sort of this feeling like outsiders don't know anything. And so if somebody came from New York City, we assumed they didn't know anything. We assumed we knew everything. And there's just so much that we didn't know. And still, to this day, I've spent 8 years on this book, and I didn't know anything about caribou seeing ultraviolet in order to see the lichens when they dig in the snow, or the wolf urine is yellow and they can see it better. And
it's like they have superpowers.
Yeah.
I guess every species does, but it's really neat.
It's like a chess game. Each part has a different power. But so caribou can also swim faster than these other animals. So when I'd be approaching caribou in my boat, my dog would lose his marble and jump out, and then suddenly discover that dogs can't swim near as fast as caribou. And then caribou's hooves spread out in the snow, so they got their snowshoes. And then tundra is basically made of tussocks, which are like round grass balls everywhere. It's incredibly hard to walk on. People hate it. Caribou can run over that at 49.2 miles an hour or whatever it is. And so, yeah, they do have... I'm going to show a couple more slides. Up there in the top right would be our sod igloo and our log cache, and then caribou hides hanging. And these were the early years. Later on, we added on to that structure, and then my dad built a door out of spruce poles and caribou hides, of course. This was our family in the village. When we traveled there as a kid, it was an incredibly arduous trip, especially for my parents dealing with kids.
So is that 60?
That would be like 1969 or so. Here's the really sad part. My mom sewed our mittens onto our parkas and made them without thumbs. And so we basically had hooves. I threw this slide in to kind of illustrate the open country and then just the step outside every day and look for animals and check the weather, because the weather decided what you were going to do every day of the year pretty much. And then the native culture has no tourism at all as far as the mindset, so you see no tracks here, so that's not a good sign, and no firewood, and no animals, and no twig big enough to clean your rifle barrel, so not seeing anything yet. And then so the idea of like, oh, beautiful country was sort of second to what it could offer. Those are tussocks, the tundra there. It goes on like a bad dream.
How far were you from this animal when you took the photo?
Oh, you want to know the honest truth?
Yes.
I was in an airplane
Oh,
with no door and just coasting with the engine sort of almost off.
Alaskan style. Yeah, that's amazing.
Kind of painful to say, but I didn't, we weren't able to land. The country was too rough. Yeah, this is more tundra and the local companions, on a daily basis of, seeing what the land is doing. And then, of course, everything is decided like, oh, well, you're not going to get a mom bear with cubs, and salmon season, it's not going to taste good. If it was on and on and on. Your eyes are almost like Arnold Schwarzenegger in one of those science fiction movies, instead of looking at the tourism view of the country. And then this would be a fox on the sea ice. Once again, his view of the world was very much like ours. What is there to eat here?
Wow. So Seth, your book is about all of that, and we could go on for even longer because it's just so much fun to hear how you lived. Plus climate change. So when did you first start noticing it, and how?
There was back to the land movement in the 60s that probably brought my parents north and other people to pursue living like the Iñupiat Eskimos and live off the land and stuff. And there was a guy in a sod igloo a couple miles up the river. Some of the year, him and his wife were there, and other years they lived in the village. And he taught us about greenhouse effect, which was the first word for, it's gone from greenhouse effect to global warming to climate change. So sadly enough, I think I heard about it when I was about 3 or 4, which is painful to think it's been 53 years.
Were your parents explaining it to you, or were you just picking it up, just hearing it?
No, they explained to us. Yeah, we didn't have much kids to deal with. We dealt with adults, Yeah. So then, not that long later, we saw, this is harvesting caribou. Let me jump forwards. I can't get to it. I'll get to it in a minute. The brush and trees just started spreading. I would say probably by the time I was 25 or 30, it started seeming like, climate change is coming. I wrote to our senator, and she told me I was crazy. And
Which one?
Well, eventually Lisa Murkowski, who was appointed by her dad. Then I'm kind of beating around, or not beating around the bush here. I'm trying to think when it just sort of hit us so hard. We just started getting rain in winter, which is well, we're in Washington, you're probably comfortable with it, but it was just such a bad thing to have rain in the winter, because the snow everything is contingent on powder snow. Your clothing, nothing can handle rain in winter. So it's a terrifying thing, and then that leads to water on top of the ice, and the biggest thing we were always warned about was open water where you fall through, or overflow, which is water on top of the ice, and then you get wet, and then it freezes, and then you die, or hope you don't die. Now, probably in the last 20 years, it's just thin ice or no ice or trees growing everywhere, and then the brush is so huge, which I've spent 15, 20 years going to the States and talking about climate change, and everybody thinks I'm crazy talking about the willows are too big. What's wrong with big willows? But if you're living off the land and everything's tied together, and then the caribou you can't even see the caribou, they're down in the brush now. And
It's disorienting.
Yeah,
You can't find anything.
And their food supply is all contingent on the time of year that this comes into bloom, and then their birthing. It all happens like 450,000 caribou head for the calving grounds, and they all have calves. The females all have calves in the same week, and It's supposed to have some food there when they have the calves, but if that changes. So everything's tied together, and the Northwest Alaska is ground zero for the way the planet's set up. We're getting the most of it. I'll show you some slides here in a minute, but yeah, well, I'm going to show you some slides. So caribou have to deal with so much stuff, and one of the things is ice, constant crossing of rivers and lakes, and then when it snows and when the snow's melting. And these are females trying to get to the calving grounds, and they have a heck of a long way to go. You can see that one just got hurt.
This is a video for anyone who can't see.
Yeah, we got a heck of a long way to go in like 10 days before they're going to have their kids. This is all right in front of where we were raised, and so this was TV as far as I'm concerned. Be peeling logs or whatever we're doing, and then you just sort of watch out in front. The river's a quarter mile wide, and you're seeing caribou kind of on a constant basis during spring breakup, crossing the ice. And this is the slide I'm after. Take careful notice behind these white people. Tundra. So these were my parents and their friends who were back to the landers, went there in the 60s. This is a log cache that my dad built right on the top right. That's the tundra that we would see caribou coming. You stay home if you want to hunt. It's the best place to hunt, staying home. So that's the tundra. Caribou would come from the north in the fall. And that's 20 years later. You can see the trees are starting to grow on that tundra. That's that same cache, so keep your wits about you here. This is my daughter on that same tundra 40 years later. So it's full. And these in the foreground are dwarf birch, which dwarf birch are supposed to be dwarf. Supposed to be like a wiry little brush on the tundra. They're 6-8 feet tall. Those spruce trees are all growing. This is that same tundra. I'm going to just back up right there. And then this is caribou coming across that tundra already 15 or 20 years ago. So, I don't have any brand new caribou. So that's the extent of not the extent of the change, the example of the change. Yeah.
Yeah, so clearly things are pretty messed up at the moment.
and then the coasts and the permafrost is melting everywhere. Catastrophic thermokarst drainage of these lakes that have been contained by permafrost. Everywhere you go, stuff's just sort of falling apart.
Yeah, it's fascinating to read about. I think a lot of us hear about the glaciers melting, but this is something very different. And there's also a lot of people, or there used to be people, who really depended on these herds for their livelihood, for their living.
I try to talk about that because we're not going to starve nowadays. We got a lot of influx of stuff off the plains, but there's something else, maybe spiritually or psychologically. I didn't get to see any caribou this year because I waited up there until I had to come on this book tour, and then the caribou all appeared like 2 days afterwards. And so I'm sort of hollow everywhere I go, thinking, I miss the caribou. Well, obviously I've got things to eat, and so there's a connection that has changed, and I kind of explore that in the book.
Yeah, the book is all about change, right? Because you depict how the arrival of machine-powered guns, snowmobiles, helicopters come in and also change everything at around the same time, really.
I go back to 1850 with the whalers bringing guns, and that was a huge demarcation when virtually every hunter in Alaska suddenly had a gun to work with. Not quite modern guns, but and then right about the time Cole and I were toddlers was when we called them snow travelers, but snowmobiles, the early snowmobiles came, and that was another huge demarcation in Iñupiat Eskimo culture, was where this contraption came that took you across the land at high speed, and then you didn't have to feed it caribou. So
The way you would a dog.
yeah,
team.
dog
Yeah.
team would you'd be. Our dogs always needed more protein than we did, Yeah.
So what do you feel like is the greater threat? All of that technology and, motor-powered culture, or the climate change?
Oh, good question. Climate change, yeah. Here's what I think is the biggest threat that we're not focusing on. If you watch the animals, they can't deal with too much change too fast. And so we can accept that. I think people are accepting that and calling that climate change and everything, but not noticing themselves that we're part of this planet and we're changing too fast. And so if you spend time in Iñupiat Eskimo culture or indigenous culture, one of the largest problems is the amount of change they've lived through in too short of a time. And then you look at animals, and then if you're not careful as Americans, you forget that we're doing the same thing. We, the collective country, is experiencing the same thing. And I've come down here, and there's COVID, and there's delays in the book, and we're fighting to get the computer to work with these pictures, and I can feel it so strong that I think people have this confidence in some sort of confidence in science and all that. And my whole book is saying, keep an eye on where your food's coming from and live close to it.
Yeah, and you also depict how large numbers of conservationists and scientists and government regulators also come in around this time. And
the 1980 brought the ANILCA, Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, I get them all mixed up, but just this huge amount of parklands, and then of course the influx of regulations and laws and agencies, and then that bumped up against the native version of life, and it's been kind of
and take limits and all of the things that
it's been a mess, big mess.
We know about that here too, but in this case it's fascinating because you've got this convergence of all this change, and they really are trying to help, but it's
agencies, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's well-meaning, but it's just awful from the way you depict it.
Well, I hope I didn't just depict it as awful. It was certainly awful if you're living that close to the land, and then somebody lands in a helicopter and says you can't do something
You
that
can
seems
have
normal.
one caribou per hunter per year.
Yeah.
In your book, you say that's like saying you could have one blueberry per year.
Yeah. So, we used to, most of my life, caribou have been sort of so many and so plentiful that it's on some level similar to picking berries. And at some point in the 70s, the state of Alaska decided, to protect the herd, to limit the bag limit to one caribou per year, which threw all of us into a mass confusion and consternation. But I hope I didn't write it as, I spent a lot of time rewriting this to try to not come across as blame. There's a lot of blame going around in the world nowadays, and that's not the way I want it to be read.
These are hard problems to solve.
Yeah, it's hard problems.
Yeah. So I want to encourage the audience to ask some questions. I think we have one here. I'd like to see a few more. But before we get to that one question, talk, if you would, a little bit about how your parents were able to pursue this lifestyle. I mean, your dad just made friends with the Eskimos. How did it... that's not easy, and you grew up in a very in-between place. You share a lot of their language in your books, and you definitely have friendships with some.
Well, that's an interesting question. So you talked about agencies and all that. So when my parents went there, it was the 60s. Things were very different. First of all, a lot of the elders saw white people as like kids. basically they didn't know anything, and it was kind of fun to teach them. And when I say white people, that could include black people and Asians or whatever. They were called white people. I'm not going to apologize for that because that's just the way it was. And outsider was another term. But so there was a certain amount of lots of tension back then too, but there's a lot more acceptance. The other thing was back then, if you had 4 stakes, you could pound them in and claim a home site. Alaska was pretty anxious to give away land. My parents chose not to. They wanted to be like the Eskimos, which saw ownership of land as a weird concept. So they didn't claim the land, which then when the agencies came has been a big problem ever since. And so as the years have passed, that pressure of different groups getting along differently, the frontier sort of coming up against laws and regulations, and 2 cultures bumping together has created a lot of tension, and you were seeing that on the news all around the world. Back to how my parents did it, my dad was sort of morally and religiously against basically stuff. And he had nothing against. If you dropped out of the sky and handed us a Honda generator, he would have been like, oh yeah, we're going to have great lights. But he didn't want to get a generator because it meant he'd have to get a job to buy the generator. So it was like, I said religiously and morally, I was joking. I mean, he just didn't want to get a job. A job would take him away from the land. He wanted to stay on the land. So that kind of kept us focused on simplicity and what we had living off the land. If it costs money, there was going to be a big family discussion that went on like a bad dream. If it didn't cost money, go for it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't buy into all that stuff.
Well, yeah, he didn't want to go get a job. Mm-hmm. And so I joke now, like, we made our own dog harnesses, but we made our own dog collars, and we made our own sleds, and we made our own everything, and, kayaks and boats and our home, and people accuse me of being a writer. I just made my own book. I wanted somebody else to write it, but they didn't.
But also, I mean, time was the resource you had.
Yeah. And so I give that credit to the land, too, because I meet other writers, and they have the American career constriction, which is like you got to get your crap together and support yourself, and I just had the land to count on. I knew I could get meat and firewood, and so I didn't have that squeezing me as far as the time to. I think my first novel, it was 20 years of writing to get that, and in that time period, I'm trusting the land to give me food, and I commercial fish, which is once again from the land.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But you also share in the book how challenging it can be for you. You feel shy in the presence of some elders. It's hard for you to ask questions because of suspicions they might have about you, even if you're just trying to learn how to do something better in the old way for yourself, not as a commercial pursuit necessarily. Where are you at with that now? Is that...
Bellamy, that's the hardest question you're going to ask tonight. Race relations have always been very hard, and I've always been in between the white world and the native world, and then in between the nature and people, crevasse in between. I've never been a part of a community, ever. So I was hopeful that was going to get better as years went by, because why wouldn't it? And I'm very disturbed now that it seems like we're not able to do anything without focusing on race, and it's just this intense focus on race instead of American or people or some other word you could use. So yeah, it's very hard.
Here's a question from the audience. Was there ever a time you wanted to up and go move to an urban city? What kept you in this lifestyle for so long?
I wanted to trap and hunt and be Eskimo. All I wanted to do was be Eskimo, and I think it has to do with that was what was cool and normal. it was very obvious that, white was very bad. My brother was always bound for college, and I was always not, but then he left, and, it was lonely along the river, and I went to college to find a girlfriend. I had no interest in a degree or any of that. And I took Taekwondo and whatever else looked easy, and I took creative writing by accident. And that's how I started on the writing. And then once I was on it, I had a hard time getting off. What was your question?
Here's another. Oh, the question, that one was, did you ever want to move to a city?
Oh, so I think if I had fit in better, I was answering your question, I knew it. I think if I had fit in better when I went to college, maybe I would have drifted in that direction, but I never did, and so I would always, I think, maybe run home where there was a comfort level, out on the land where the land was normal and did what normal things should do.
Okay, here's one. I think it's mostly for me, but maybe. Iñupiat Eskimos. I am Iñupiat sitting in the audience and wonder why I have to be called Eskimos.
Oh.
And I'll just say, for my part, that I don't know enough about it.
Oh, well, it has to do with a couple questions back where, talking about race relations. I wrote Shopping for Porcupine. It was published by Milkweed in 2007. And they said, oh, you're not allowed to call, those people Eskimos. And I was like, all my friends call themselves Eskimos. All my Eskimo friends call themselves Eskimos. And they said, oh, you have to use...
I feel better now.
Yeah, they said you have to say Inuit. And so I asked my friends in Ambler, and they said, what's that, some computer program? Inuit. That sounds like Intuit or whatever. Inuit 2.1. So ever since then, I've started down this path of nervousness. And that's why I say Iñupiat Eskimo, because there's a certain amount of people that still are like, the Eskimo means this to them, and then there's a certain amount of people that don't want to just be that. They want to be know that it's Iñupiat as opposed to Yupik. So that's why I'm saying it, but it's only trying to jump across the ice pans between the PC cold water of the PC world. Otherwise, yeah, that's why I'm saying it.
The questions are rolling in here.
Oh.
I have more of my own, but you
let me
guys
say
are so good
a couple
at
things real quick. I don't know where we're at as far as time, but so caribou, partly because of climate change, are often migrating later, which causes them to follow across the ice, which wouldn't be there in September. If they come in November, then there's ice. And lately, they've been bumping up directly against Kotzebue, where they migrate through. This is ocean, but it's frozen. You can see a bunch of trucks out on it. And so technology is a huge influx of technology and bumping up against caribou and nature. And this is just an example now. Instead of the old wooden sleds, plastic sleds, snowmobile instead of dogs, and white parka made in Florida, what we call beaver hat, what you call AR-15, what we call rifle, sealskin pants. So just all these dichotomies, and still out there searching for food. Hunting, when machinery came and I shouldn't say allowed, but made it possible to chase down animals, that has been part of hunting practices now, which is it is what it is. It's another complex issue. Gathering is still seen as really focused on the what you get, and not necessarily saying like, oh, maybe I'm using too much technology. And so these are all issues. And somewhere in your questions, I think you're going to say like, why did it take you so long to write this book? Some of that is that it's a quagmire.
So here's another audience question. I want to honor the audience for people who are attending. And,
yep, absolutely.
So we'll skip some of my questions. Did you expect to have this deep connection with caribou? How do you keep the balance of love and food?
Well, I love the food. I'm realizing more and more, writing makes me think, which I wouldn't do, otherwise I'd just go get a caribou and cook it and eat it. But somewhere along the line, writing makes me have to think. I'm realizing that all I ever do is gather. I just gather. And so if I'm driving down the road in Missoula, Montana, and I pass a 2x4 with nails in it, all I can think about is how hard it is to make your own 2x4, which you remember. Trying to make boards with a chainsaw, and after you drag the log home and peel it, whatever, all work. And then it twists and warps and cups and cracks and everything that a green tree does. And so stories, photographs, the caribou meat, the skin, everything, all I'm doing is gathering in different ways. And so when technology came and I could hunt easier than it used to be, then I still wanted to hunt. But then I had my dad's ethic, which you can't just go shoot stuff because you feel like killing or whatever. So photography is so wonderful because then it's so much harder than hunting. And then writing about this stuff is more gathering. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
It's all gathering.
Attendee number 7's question, I think it was. I'm not sure.
And then food, sometimes I think I'm crazy, so focused on food, but then sometimes I think you guys are crazy not to just only focus on food. Yeah.
I love food.
And where it comes from and how you get it and where it's going to be. And yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
This is, I think, an action question. What has been the most challenging thing you've encountered, and how did you get over that?
It's computers, and I haven't gotten over it. Yeah, it does something to my brain. I can never remember which button to press. My eye doesn't know where to go.
But I would say for that person, if you were looking for action, read Bounty Hunter, which is a chapter late in the book.
Oh, okay. Yeah, computers, and that's kind of why I mostly quit photography, because now every photo goes through the computer, and everything goes through the computer. Whoops, I almost said a bad word.
But you've had some harrowing experiences, some of which you've written
There's
about
an
in this
expert
book.
back here, and he had everything working until I got within 6 feet of him, and then my photos just sort of vanished, and I have that effect on computers. Yeah.
Okay,
Oops.
let's see. On average, how many caribou do you take each year? I think that one changes over time.
I haven't gotten any in a year, I think. But I would say probably 6. Yeah, if I could. Yeah.
These days?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's sharing. Yeah. And drying and whatever else you do with caribou.
This might be a long answer, but I think we have a little bit of time, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it because I think it's really to the point of how the event is billed. You've had good friends who have died going through the sea ice due to warming? Clarence, ? Can you talk about how climate change has impacted the lives of people you know in the Arctic?
Yeah. So before I forget, I switched to a slide of the open pit mine, Red Dog mine in Northwest Alaska, and I want to get back to development. Mixed in with all this cultural change I'm talking about, and climate change is, the threat of development to the caribou and the land. My friend, more than one of my friends have gone through the ice and drowned, but my friend Alvin, it wasn't Clarence, it was Alvin, who was my age and like a brother to me.
He's an indigenous guy who you grew up kind of side by side, right?
Yeah, so he went through the ice 2.5 years ago, got swept under the But anyway, yeah, it's a mix of things. It's definitely our so-called knowledge is getting all wiggly and useless. which I think yours is too, of what the ice does at certain seasons, and what to expect from the weather, and that climate change up there is it's exponentially more because we travel on ice. So I guess if your roads here all went away in the summer and then you were waiting for them to come back in the fall, which we do because we travel on ice, and then it just rained and you never got the roads, and then finally you're like, okay, I'm going to try it today, and it's too thin. That would be an analogy of what the loss of ice is for us. And then there's so much more mixed in because the cultural changes have made, especially for young Iñupiat men, to be sort of unsure of their place as far as providing and hunting, and so there's more of a chance of people going out and risking their lives. It's hard to decide how much your life is worth. And so you mix that with more dangerous conditions or uncertain conditions. And it's hard to just talk about in 5 minutes. It's super complex. But so climate change is making our world much more dangerous in so many ways, which all I'm going to say is that I feel like that's finally starting to come to the lower 48. For 20 years I've been talking about it, but I've been talking about our home conditions, and then now you hear about fires and hurricanes and stuff, and so it feels to me like that.
People dying in
What
the heat
what
here.
I've been sort of talking about for years is starting to make more sense.
Yeah, so let's move to this next question. I think it's maybe a fun one to end on before we wrap up. How do you feel about the bushcraft movement as the modern return to the land movement, in particular with the numerous Wild Alaska TV reality shows that have become popular? Do you feel they send a good message about living off natural resources responsibly, or are they promoting an unrealistic lifestyle in the name of entertainment?
A couple things. One is I've never had TV in my life. I'm the worst person to ask about reality shows because I've seen like 12 seconds of 3 of them. I'm under-exaggerating. Actually, I've seen a tiny bit more than that. But I find them to be incredibly maddening because we have so many humorous, tragic, on and on things going on in Alaska, and for it to all be this bogus drama is really frustrating. There's just so much to life in Alaska that is not on those shows.
Doesn't it feed into also some of the culture that you depict of, the Rambo hunter style, the people with their checklists, their bucket list?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the fear and and you're going to starve if you don't do this. I've only seen a few of these shows, but they're just taking this one-dimensional layer off the top of life there, and it's just so, there's so much that's so interesting that's not getting in there. I don't know where as time. I really want to talk about for a second or two about the dangers of development. So
Do that,
I
and
live
then we'll wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I live in the Brooks Range, which is the range across the top of Alaska, and then there's Alaska Range farther south where the Denali is, and it's full of minerals. On the north slope of that, they call it the North Slope for a reason. It's on the north side of the Brooks Range, where Prudhoe Bay and the caribou herds and the oil development that's more widely known and publicized. Where I'm at, they wanted, in the process of building the so-called Ambler Road, which is off the pipeline road, 200-mile road to access all this country where caribou live. And they want to build a whole bunch of these up there. And there's no way that we can have both wilderness or semi-wilderness or the remains of the indigenous culture living to more or less, to a certain extent off the land, or have this many caribou flowing over the land if we have roads and mines and all that stuff. And there's a lot of rhetoric saying we can have both, which I don't believe for a second. And it's just and that doesn't even include the fish in the rivers and the water we drink, and on and on and on. This is the tundra from the air. It's literally melting from the heat, the permafrost melting underneath the tundra, which is releasing all sorts of energy for plants to grow much larger and faster, and then different plants. Like many places in the world, we're having long spats of climate change, where it's not climate change, but weather change, where dry spells, and then this summer endless rain. So we're having way more forest fires and tundra fires. Parasites are changing rapidly. This is bot flies in the throat of a caribou. And so the fly lays the egg, and then spend most of the year growing inside the caribou's throat and sinuses. Also, their hide, under their hide, is full of another version of the same thing that grow as big as your end of your finger, and over the course of many months, caribou have to deal with. Caribou are dealing with so many changes in ice, where they're getting washed out by thin ice, and changing patterns that break up ice. On and on and on, life as a caribou.
Seth? Ooh, that's one of my favorites.
The other thing is that, now when caribou do come through a community, there's a lot of hunting pressure. And this is a calf that's mom has been shot by hunters, and the calf stayed there day after day. Finally moved on, and
It didn't just move on. It's Papa.
Oh.
Its adopted Papa brought it, right?
This is I included in the book. It's hard to try to encompass this whole book in an hour, but an old guy there told me years ago that caribou, animals are individuals, and so much of biology is looking at animals as numerical averages and such, and animals are individuals, and that I needed to learn to see them that way. And he said, like people. And so this bull caribou, which right after the rut, most bulls are starving because they've been partying for a month, and are usually completely oblivious of calves. The mom had been shot, and the bulls encouraging the calf to get up and go with the migration, which is, I use it. It's just an example of this animal being an individual.
Because you said you saw several others walk past
Oh,
it, and
they
it
all
was
did.
just except for this one guy.
Oh yeah, hundreds. Yeah. So
This one guy decided to take care of that.
so
baby
anyway,
girl.
yeah, and I'm not sure how we're doing as far as time.
Yeah, it's time
but
to wrap up.
Yeah.
We've got to wrap up. But just a quick question from me, sort of summing it up. These caribou have been resilient in the past. Are they going to make it?
Well, we just need to give them a chance. We have a lot of control nowadays that used to be just nature. Nature was nature, and so we need to help them.
So you are optimistic.
I would like if we helped them.
Okay. And then just finally, 1,000 Trails Home. Where is home now? Is it still?
Oh, it's still there, yeah. I just came from there, yep.
It's still that
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah. It's painful how much time I've spent on that one hill. But, not painful, but it's just kind of interesting to look at the world scurrying around. And my dad's philosophy was like, oh, wait, oh, I want to hunt caribou. Oh, well, wait. So just wait for things to come to you. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your book.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks
yeah.
everyone for turning out or tuning in. Go to mountaineersbooks.org to get it, or to your favorite independent bookseller. get your hands on a copy and really enjoy the reading and the learning and looking at the photographs. It's a really, really good read, really good book. So thanks, everyone. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks very much. Normally I'd say I'd sign your book afterwards, but it's on the barge out there somewhere. So I'll sign your book next time I'm in town.